Well, hello, Kenosha City Church. Welcome to this Kenosha City Church midweek podcast. And you have just heard us talk about IVF in our Christ Culture Church series. And now we want to unpack it a little bit further with a couple here at Kenosha City Church. We have Robbie and Abby Campbell. Thank you so much for being with us here today to discuss IVF. And it's one thing to discuss it as a concept or even theologically of like, what does this mean? But what does it mean from those who are Christians, such as yourselves, Bible-believing Christians, want to be faithful with the Lord? How can you faithfully walk through the process of IVF? So we're going to talk about that today. But before we do, I would love to introduce you to our church. And for those of listening and watching online, introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about yourself, how you came to Christ and how you came to Kenosha.
Yeah. So I'm Robbie. See me around here, help out with the Revolution Youth on Sunday nights. So very much enjoy that. Growing up in a Christian home, my dad was a preacher's kid, and so we grew up going to church our whole lives and stuff, but didn't really apply myself in high school, focused on some other things over, my faith a little bit, especially football. Football got in the way of me going to youth group a lot, and so didn't really get to have that connection. So I really love that I get to enjoy being at Revolution Youth on Sunday nights and help those kids. But yeah, I really came into my faith a lot more in college and just made some mistakes in my life, as we all have. We're natural sinners, but just really started to come into my faith. I got to meet Abby, and it was just kind of, I was telling some people, it really just kind of naturally happened. I wasn't really seeking out a marriage or a relationship or anything. It all just kind of happened. I think God really did have a plan for me, one that I did not expect coming. And from there, it's just been a blessing so far.
And where did you guys meet?
We met at Trinity International.
Trinity, that's a good school.
So a lot of
alma mater.
A lot of alum from here. So my brother was 2 years older than me. He started going there, played football there. I played football there for 2 years, dealt with some injuries to where I ended up transferring out of Trinity. Just could not afford to go there without that football scholarship for sure. But really enjoyed my time there, and a lot of the professors and people that I surrounded myself with really helped me come into my faith a lot more. And then meeting Abby, she really helped me a lot too. So yeah, Trinity was great for me for those 2 years, and I'm very thankful for that time that I had. And now I'm here with my wife that I got to meet there too. So.
And Abby, you graduated from Trinity.
I did. So I grew up my family wasn't really a Christian family. I mean, we went to church on Easter, Christmas, all those types
Priesters,
of, yeah,
yes.
Priesters. We were Priesters. I loved getting to pick out a Christmas dress for church every year. But really in high school, we moved to Gurnee, and my parents heard about this really good youth group, and they dropped me off at it, and I was really confused because I was like, you don't go to church? Why are you dropping me off at church? But through that, I found a lot of community during that time, and then my grandma passed away, and so I even leaned in harder to that community. And then I just continued through there, and my faith grew a ton in high school. I had a really big fear of like going on trips like without my parents, and ended up going to Haiti on a missions trip. And that was a really great blessing. And then I went to Trinity, which deepened my faith even further. I got lifelong friends. I met Robbie. And then
before that too, you were on the verge of going to Carroll University.
I was committed to Carroll University, and I sent Trinity a message. I said, "Listen, I can't come because you're too expensive." So
they were expensive.
Yeah. So I was like, "Well, it's just too expensive." And then I was about to commit to Carroll, and then they emailed me back, and they actually were less than Carroll. So there we go. Trinity really came through.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. But yeah, so then I met Robbie, really went through a lot through those years, as we'll get into.
Now, when were you married? How long ago?
2022.
2022, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going on 3 years in June.
All right.
But we met what year?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
to sit here and say that we have a 5-month-old would the younger me, college me, would have been like, yeah, no
You're
way.
crazy.
No way. Now,
yeah, as he sits there.
Now, you are here tonight to talk about the process of
Yeah.
IVF. And so what, if you don't mind, like
Yeah.
kind of talk about the lead up to that, like
Yeah.
like what led to you pursuing IVF?
Yeah.
Talk about that process of really deciding, hey, this is a route that we should go.
Right. A lot of couples usually have to try multiple years to get
Mhm.
referred to an IVF or a fertility doctor. But in high school, for me, there was a couple signs that my mom saw, and she took me to just my physician.
Mhm.
And they were like, yeah, something's not right. It was with my hormone levels. And so they did a bunch of testing, which was very difficult and a lot of years of fighting because the type of testing that needed to be done, insurance didn't want to cover, obviously, because it's genetic testing and brain scans. And so I ended up being diagnosed with Kallman syndrome, which if you Google it doesn't make any sense.
Not at all.
So I don't suggest you to Google it. If you're listening and have Kallman syndrome, don't Google it. But it's basically in my brain, the pituitary gland does not balance hormones correctly. And so with that being said, the doctor said, basically, you will have to be like on birth control for your life to help you balance those hormones. And you don't have eggs. You can never naturally conceive. And in high school, you would be like, oh yeah, high schooler, like she's fine. I've always wanted to be a mother. And so that was a punch in the gut. That was such a hard thing for me to process. And I remember like my family was like, you're not there yet. You don't know what's going to happen type of thing. But like, I'm like, something that's such a longing in my heart that I knew like from such a young age, how can I not be upset about this?
Right.
So I ended up going to therapy, but like, again, you're not starting that process. So you don't know all of the unknowns. So my mom didn't believe it either. And she took me to 2 different doctors and they all said the same thing. And so after 3 different doctors telling me the same exact thing, right. Yeah.
Looks like you have someone else that wants to interview.
Yeah,
you.
he's like, wait, let me talk about that for a second. But we kind of just accepted that. And then I started the grieving process of like therapy.
And this is all before you're married.
Yeah, this was in
before,
high
yeah.
school.
Wow.
This was in high school. I didn't
I'm
even
in
know
Indiana,
Robbie.
so
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Robbie had no idea.
You're in Indiana.
I was over here grieving and Robbie, like for our future, and Robbie's just like having a great time in high school.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started that. I've really had a really hard time with it. And then, I met Robbie and I remember like feeling like I'm like the Lord. I was telling my friend at Trinity at the time, I was like, the Lord Robbie would like be super deep with me. And then he'd look at me in my eyes. He'd be like, is there anything you want to tell me? And I'm like, no.
We had some very very deep conversations very early on. Not just about like this kind of stuff, but a lot of family.
Yeah.
things
And he
that
would just
we were
like,
dealing
it
with.
would be like the perfect cue. Cause normally it's a very hard topic to bring up with someone you're about to start dating. Like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm infertile, like type of thing. And so it kept being brought up and I was like, and she's like, well, maybe the Lord is telling you to like really open up to Robbie about it. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then I was like, okay, if it happens again, like, then I'll open up to him. And it did. And, I literally told Robbie, I was like, hey, I really am infertile. 3 different doctors told me that. So this is what it is. You can make your decision. But so then obviously Robbie's like, I'm in this with you, whichever way it goes. We get married and I'm like, it's a really long process. That's what you hear with IVF is it can take years.
So did you choose to like maybe look at IVF even before, like, is this an option for me even before you knew Robbie?
Abby knew a lot.
I
more.
researched it because finding out, I'm like, how can I have kids?
Okay.
If then, so I've been doing a lot of research on it, which there wasn't a ton. It's very booming. The faster, like the more we go on. Okay. Yes. But then I was like, it takes a long time. I really, really want to get this process going. And Robbie was like, well, I'm not really ready for kids quite yet. And I was like, well, Robbie, it takes years. Like I just want to know what happens because you're on the edge of what's this going to look like for me. And I'm like, for 10 years, I've been thinking about this. So we met with our doctor, did all the tests. She said, we come down to this meeting and we sit down and she goes, okay, yes. So we're going to do IUI. And for those who don't know, IUI is more of a natural cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to go through IVF, but it's where you have your own eggs. And I looked at her and I was like, why would we do that? Is it to like just prove to insurance that it doesn't work? Because, some insurances want you to do the less expensive procedure and work your way up. And she was like, no. And I was like, well, then why would we do it? Like, I don't have eggs. And she goes, and she like looked at me for a second. And this lady is just the sweetest, like little lady. And she goes, yes, you do. And I like looked at her, and for 5 minutes back and forth, because we're both strong-headed, I was like, no, I do not, Dr. Shanti. And she goes, yes, you do. And then Robbie interjected.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think what Abby is trying to say is she's been told for 10 years through 3 different doctors that she does not have eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. But like, I could not personally believe it because that's why we were referred. Like, obviously, we still needed to do IVF to help with my hormone balances, just for a natural, like, pregnancy and whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of what led us to IVF, is because I was told even in high school that we would deal with infertility and I would deal with that. So we got in through that diagnosis that I had.
So how soon into your marriage were you starting the process of IVF? Because it takes some time.
So we were married in June, and it took 5 months. No,
Yeah, February of 2023 is when we had that first
meeting.
Video call with
not
our
even a year.
doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's such a long wait list too.
Right.
Yeah. Abby was very persistent, and I was very, and I can say this with full honesty, like I was super selfish about the fact that I wanted to spend 2 years married, figuring each other out, doing all these fun things together and stuff. All reality, we didn't do a whole lot of that. We were saving money and trying to pay off student loans and stuff like that. So we really didn't even do all of those things. So in my head, in my heart, there was some selfishness in that, and the fact that like I wanted to control the timeline of when we had kids. And we talked about that a lot in the Christ Culture series about it's not our timeline, like God has a plan for us and stuff. Yeah. So I learned that very quickly, and I'm very thankful that I learned that very quickly, and that selfishness went away. But yeah, very quick in our marriage.
So and again, this has to do with you really looking at this even before you knew Robbie.
Yeah.
Looking at, okay, you have this burden knowing that, okay, I'm being told by multiple doctors there's infertility here, and so you're beginning to look at what can I do, and I imagine even the pressure of, okay, when I meet that guy someday, I'm gonna have to tell him.
It was a lot of pressure, and it's heartbreaking because, and when I talked to him, I told him this, like, well, one is super vulnerable to bring someone in to one of your biggest heartbreaks, and so not knowing how they're gonna respond is such a hard thing, and
we hardly knew each other.
Yeah, I know. But also just my heartbreak is if he chooses to continue, it's going to become his.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like, luckily our IVF process, even though it felt like a very long time, it was one of the easier processes we've heard, one of our stories. But like, when you get married, your spouse's heartbreak becomes your own. And knowing how deep my heartbreak was, I was so scared to have someone else join that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 things I hear from that, and I think this is going to encourage our listeners and those who are watching, is that, number one, you had the trust that God was going to put somebody in your life that was going to walk you through it. And that's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
You'll walk through this.
Absolutely.
But also, this was a decision that wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to do IVF. This is something that you had been thinking for years about this.
Praying.
And this really leads me to the next question then, is that as you as a Christian, as a Christ follower, began to consider IVF, even as a couple considering IVF, how did your relationship with Jesus, how did being faithful to the Word of God lead you in this process? Because I mean, we heard in the message, I don't need to repeat everything I said in the message because you just watched it, but we just came out of a political season where people on both sides of the aisle, they used it as a talking point.
Yeah.
And really what was lost in all of that is, wait a minute, is this valid or is it invalid in all situations? Well, I said in the message, it can be valid
Right.
if we keep it biblical.
Yep.
Right.
All right. And so, what were some of those things that you considered, you individually, but then when you came together as a couple, what were the things that you considered to keep biblical with IVF? And what are some things that you encourage those that are considering IVF of how to make sure that God is leading this path?
Mm.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say so much because first I would just be very prayerful.
Mm.
There was never a time in Robbie and I's journey with IVF where we felt any type of, whoa, let's hold off on this, or, oh, we don't feel very comfortable with this. Because anyone who's going through infertility or wanting to have a kid is you kind of just get in this zone of like, this is what I want. And infertility, especially IVF, can get really dicey and really not biblical if you have that mindset. If you want to do it the fastest way you want to end up with a kid.
You have to be a major advocate for yourself and for the life that you are looking to have.
You as a woman, you are an advocate for your baby when they're in your stomach
Mm-hmm.
and after. But for a woman or like your spouse to do IVF, you have to be the advocate before the child's even created.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're signing off to, for example, the biggest thing is the embryos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's 3 different types of embryos. There's very much more scientific names for it. So you can Google it if you would like to. But there's the normal embryo, the abnormal, and the mosaic. And where you will find the most controversy is the mosaic, because the mosaic has half normal, half abnormal cells, or a different mix. And a lot of infertility clinics won't transfer those because they want a perfect embryo. And a lot of scientific studies, they don't know if that mosaic egg would become a terminal illness or if it will result in Down syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the infertility clinics would like to say, well, we're just not going to do that because it won't be good life.
Mm.
Right? Which
Mhm.
that's not accurate
at
biblically at all.
That borderlines
Right.
eugenics.
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. So that's just where that comes from. And so you have to know, so do your research on the different type of embryos that can come through IVF and really sit down with your doctor. We sat down with our doctor and we told her our views and what we wanted for our embryos. And she was under the understanding with us. And then we had to learn about the process of your clinic, because a lot of clinics won't transfer mosaic or those type of embryos, or they'll destroy it right on site, which we do not agree with.
Right, that'd be destruction of life.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so luckily our clinic didn't do that. So you have to really ask your clinic those questions of, what do you do with mosaic eggs? Do you transfer them or do you throw them away? Do you get rid of them, dispose them?
I think this is huge, because you use the word, you have to advocate for yourself. So I can see people that maybe are passive or they don't like tension.
Yeah.
Right.
That's me.
And
But
so,
I don't like that.
they don't like tension. And so I can see people, Christians, Christ followers, walking into this process and they don't know what they're signing up for or what just happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so I really believe this could be a watershed moment for people as they walk into this.
Right.
How do they need to advocate for themselves so they don't sign off on something that was
and they will, because the paper was set down in front of us and said, sign here, please. And if I did not reach out to one of my friends, I would have signed it, which would have just been an automatic, okay, we're going to do genetic tests, and we didn't know what our clinic did. Luckily, our clinic didn't get rid of them, but a lot of clinics do.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, is I want to take this, the negative. A lot of people like to throw around like they don't like genetic testing, right? It's not about the genetic test. It's about what you do with that knowledge, right?
Correct.
And that's super important, because we were like, I don't know, we felt a lot of pressure and being scared, but we're like, whatever comes from this genetic test, does not change our viewpoint or what we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah.
Too. It just provides knowledge on how to help us get pregnant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and for Abby's situation, the genetic testing let our doctor know what was, if these things didn't work, why. And a buddy of mine was talking about this because him and his wife are pregnant right now, and they were talking about genetic testing, and it's like, you're not going to love that child any less because of the results that come from that and stuff. So that's a whole thing that
Yeah.
comes about this. That
It was just to better understand, okay, does my body need more hormones to help sustain a pregnancy? Or, sadly, people do go through miscarriages, and that can happen in IVF as well when they're creating these embryos. So was it just the genetic makeup of the embryo that would have resulted in a miscarriage if it happened naturally, or was it Abby's hormone levels because we want her to sustain this pregnancy type of thing? So again, do your research on your own factors of infertility and what causes that. If you don't if it's not really a problem like with those hormones, talk with your doctor too. Is genetic testing something necessary information for your journey to become pregnant? And if you do go that route, make sure that your doctor knows your values and your expectations for your embryos and your children. Because if you don't, then it can lead to destruction of your children.
Yeah. Right. And you made a great point about like the women that are going through that have been told that, they're infertile, are hurting. They're like, there's a part of them that is broken. And when they are told that there is a chance through IVF or a situation like that, it brings light. And there's a lot of women that may say, I will do whatever it takes to have that life. And they don't do that research. They don't look into the details, what the clinics are doing, what the doctors are doing. It differs from state to state, as we know.
Clinic to clinic. Because I kind of like describe it like a dentist, like they're individual clinics. Luckily, we went to Milwaukee, so it was a more established clinic in the sense of it was like a part of Aurora Healthcare, right? Whereas there could be individual clinics that they all practice different things. They all see different viewpoints of the embryos and what their protocols are. Like I had a friend who they immediately destroyed mosaic eggs when they were tested, whereas our clinic doesn't. So that's a really important thing to realize.
Yeah.
And that's the hard reality of it is you may live in an area where that is the reality. They don't consider that, perfect life that God has created. And you have to make that decision. You have to have that hard sit down in prayer and say like, yeah, this is where I live, but this is what's going on at these clinics. And I ethically can't sit here and think that that's okay,
Yeah, you mentioned from the message the staggering numbers of embryos that are being destroyed by the IVF industry. You had heard about it, but brought up in the Christ culture.
Yeah, we didn't know
message.
the number.
Yeah, it's staggering. It's more than abortions.
Right.
And it's why that even some Christians have come to the view of, well, I don't think anybody should have IVF.
Yeah.
And I think with those individuals, and we have dear friends, even our, there's even individuals that we're partners with that have that view that, hey, I would rather you not, but if you do, follow these rules.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's a valid view for them. I think they bring up a validity of some of these organizations that are unethical and destroying these. But I really believe that if we can follow the guidelines of which you guys did, and this is why we have you on here, you can be such an encouragement to those that are going to get confused through the process or aren't thinking of embryos being human beings. You're bringing such clarity to this. But I believe there's room, and just as you guys have demonstrated, that we can ethically see through the advancement of technology, which is a gift from the Lord,
Amen.
that if we see these embryos as human beings, and you see the embryo through as a human being,
Mhm.
I believe that we can see something absolutely beautiful and God honoring in that
Right.
process, and
Well,
that's what you guys
Yeah,
did.
and through
and
this,
we're sitting here
yeah.
with
Yes,
Hudson
yeah,
today,
Yeah.
I'm
and it's
looking
just
at
like
you.
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
Abby and I have been talking recently about like we have you know, and it's a huge praise from God. We have 3 more embryos
Mhm.
that are frozen right now. And as we look at what that first one created in Hudson, and as we watch him grow over these 5 months, we're like, oh my goodness, like we
Mhm.
have an amazing opportunity
Mhm.
to use those other ones and just continue to
Right.
further his kingdom.
And I do want to say too, IVF, there are a million miracles that need to happen for it to happen.
Mhm.
There's so much that goes into it that God, that like IVF is a huge part of my testimony.
Mhm.
In this, and God moved like through IVF. He opened so many doors. So many things have to go right. They have to be perfect for you to end up with a baby.
Mhm.
And I do not believe those things happen just on accident or by the doctors, because the doctors can only do so much with medicine. It really, like, I had to take multiple different medications to hope that my eggs grew correctly to then take them out. And then we had to hope that they were good eggs and that they would fertilize. And there's so many statistics that God proved wrong. Like, we should have ended up with no embryos
Based on the number of
based on
eggs
the
that we
number of
received. Yeah.
statistic our
Wow.
numbers that we
Wow.
had and the statistics. You're supposed to, like, it's insane. And so I understand where people are coming from. Like, if you don't do IVF ethically, like, absolutely, I agree with them. But
Mhm.
also leave room for God to be able to work miracles where, like, people aren't looking sometimes. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah, and doing IVF
Mhm.
ethically, biblically, let's put it.
Yep.
I'd imagine that could
Mhm.
cost more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
But it's worth the cost.
that is just another amazing answer to prayer.
Yeah.
You know, Abby works at a school district in Illinois, and
They cover it.
for
Wow.
some reason it's
So
covered.
Illinois is covered.
Mhm.
Wisconsin is not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, IVF is not covered
We're
through
hoping and
insurance.
praying that happens, that it gets
Yeah,
covered
that
in
it
every state.
not every state sees it as they will cover it. So
Mhm.
like, I have the same insurance as Robbie. Robbie works in Wisconsin, it doesn't cover it, whereas I do, and it covers it. So we actually had a huge blessing where IVF obviously is expensive
Yeah.
to meet the deductibles and for all the
Mhm.
procedures
Mhm.
and whatnot.
Hundreds and hundreds and
But
hundreds
if
of
you are
thousands of
paying out
dollars.
of pocket, it is a fine, like, it was a financial burden that we had to budget for. It in itself, and insurance covered it, but like, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for people
Wow.
if it is not covered.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's something to look at. Like, I've heard people, like, they work at Starbucks
Mhm.
because Starbucks insurance covers infertility. Like, you have to really, so that's another point. If you are in a state that doesn't cover it, work at Starbucks. Like, that's something I looked into before I met Robbie, of like, because I knew IVF wasn't covered.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, to do it ethically, it can cost a lot more, because you might say to them, because a lot of the times they'll pull as many eggs as you can
Right.
through the egg retrieval. But so to do that, you would have to sit down with your doctor and say, I don't want that many pulled, like a reasonable number and whatnot. So you might have to do multiple egg retrieval rounds, and that is very expensive.
And I said, again, there's a number of areas in life where we don't cut corners as Christians.
Right.
It may cost us more, but in the end, it's absolutely worth it.
Right.
To live biblical. And so you have, you said 3
Mhm.
3
additional
more,
eggs,
yep.
Okay. And so kind of walk through that. Walk through, what's that look like?
Yeah, well, we have absolutely every intention of utilizing those. IVF is a process, and it looks a little different for every woman. And for Abby, it's not easy, and my heart, you know, mourns sometimes. And I administer these shots that she has to take, and it is a physically, you know, brutal thing that you have to do to help her body create a healthy environment for the embryo to be in. those next 9 months and stuff. So it is rough, and it's weeks upon weeks of doing these shots daily, multiple times a day and stuff. So we're taking time right now to just kind of heal from that, enjoy the time that we have with Hudson, and when the time comes that and everything kind of lines up, and we're just gonna be prayerful about that. Because you talked about, like, you can still plan. There's time to plan for things, but allow God to kind of intervene with that as well. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. But yeah, we have every intention of utilizing those. We're young. We're 25 right now. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but
Yeah.
but it is important to kind of do this pretty quickly, so that Abby's body can continue to be a healthy environment. Because the older you get, the
lower the rates go
yeah,
down.
yeah, and
Statistically.
that's sometimes doesn't really matter. But
Yeah.
So what would you say, like, we've had people ask us questions before.
Yeah, of
whether,
course.
whether not necessarily even here.
Right.
And they say, hey, we've had IVF, but we don't want any more babies. And that is the risk of especially if you have a lot of eggs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what would you say to the parents that are like, yeah, we don't want any more, but we have additional eggs?
The biblical thing to do is you can put them up for embryo adoption, because there are multiple couples who just can't have a healthy, like, they don't have a healthy egg or a healthy sperm, so they just do embryo adoption. And so that is definitely the biblical way to go. Otherwise, they will be destroyed, which is a destruction of life.
Or like frozen for probably way too long. I mean, we kind of talked about it in the sermon. Those was it twins?
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, if you don't, but
that's another financial thing too. We pay monthly for those eggs to be frozen
safely,
and stuff. Yeah, safely.
It's
So
about $1,000 a year.
$2,500. But it's not like that for every clinic. Our clinic luckily has that type of freezer on site, whereas other clinics, they have to ship them off, and then, which runs the risk of them being destroyed if they're not kept at the prime temperature that they need to be. And then you have to pay to get them shipped
back,
and then you have to pay for an outside facility to keep them there. So it's much more expensive. So again, look at your clinics. But yeah,
there's a lot of homework here. So
Very
they're
a
all
lot.
the same.
no,
And you have to assume they're not going to come from a biblical ethic.
no, yeah, and yeah,
So you do really have to advocate for yourself. I think that's the
absolutely.
word of
You
of this
have
interview
to
is
advocate for yourself and your
advocate
children.
biblical worldview in this.
Yeah,
Now, for the couples that they realize, hey, we need to adopt, and maybe they want to just because they want to adopt.
Yeah.
There's a lot of adopted eggs that are there and left there.
embryos. Yeah,
But or embryos, excuse me. Yes.
yeah,
But for those couples that either they don't have an egg or the sperm is weak,
Right.
or they want to adopt, like, is this a process? I actually don't know the answer to
Yeah.
this. Is this a process where there's actually an organization they can go to adopt, or is this usually through their doctor that they can talk about adoption?
I don't know much about that,
Mhm.
but I know the doctor is the starting point.
Mhm.
And also, I'd be very careful with that too, because you can pick your kid.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
Yeah, you can get all the
you can do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
that
So
you
a
want.
designer baby then.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Wow.
when you're
Again, we're
adopting,
bordering
it wouldn't
eugenics
be
there
a
again.
designer baby,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
can decide, okay, what do I want my kid to
Correct.
look like? What
Correct.
do
Wow.
I want their backgrounds to be?
Wow.
So also just be wise and be very careful with that too.
Mm.
And our process didn't look a whole lot like that. They didn't get really deep into that at all. I mean,
I don't
the
think
biggest,
our doctor believed in that.
the
Okay.
biggest thing that we
Wow.
were asked
So-
is, do you
many
want us to transfer
avenues
a
here.
boy or a
Yeah.
girl?
Mhm.
And we said we want to transfer the healthiest
Because they
embryo
put
that you
them
have.
in order from grades, right?
Mhm.
Grade AA, B,
Yeah.
BB, it goes down. So they put them in order. And for us, we're going to be transferring all of them. But for others, they're like, well, I remember she's like, do you want a boy or a girl? And we're like, just a healthy baby. And she like did a little chuckle and she's like, good. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because you can tell in this industry, you can pick and choose. So
Wow.
again, with adoption, just be aware of that.
Yeah.
Be aware that
I'm
you
glad
don't,
brought that
yeah,
up.
you
That's
don't
just an avenue
fall
I didn't think
into the big book of being able to choose who you want your child to
Right.
be.
Yeah. And if you are a Christian and maybe you have too many embryos, and you are looking into that adoption, just like obviously be prayerful for that, but think about the family that you're going to help, and what
And the
the life
child.
that you were able to create
Mhm.
is going to do for a family that's in need.
Mhm.
And it's just,
Mhm.
it's beautiful to think about. And I mean, we're not going to go down that route because we have intentions of using them all.
Mhm.
But if we had to, that's the first
Yeah.
Right.
and the only option that we would set for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
So
And this is so important that as we vote, and we're not a voting season right now, but it's always something we have to think of, whether it's our courts, whether it's our congressmen, representatives, you name it, that biblical worldview has to really hone in on the embryo, has to
Yeah.
hone in on this process, just like any other process in healthcare.
Right.
If God is removed from healthcare, then it's the expediency of what's comfortable
yeah,
or what we desire, instead of actually, like you said, God doing things
yeah,
on his timetable and his way.
yeah,
All right. Now, I really believe that what you guys have just laid out here have really informed our listeners and our audience of the importance of understanding this, thinking this through, and never going on autopilot in
Right.
this
Yeah.
situation.
Autopilot.
Now, again, IVF can be used for the glory of God, and when we allow God to walk through it. And you guys have been a shining example of that.
thank you. Yeah,
Robbie and Abby, we are just so elated to see Hudson in the church, and you can interrupt my sermons every once in a while, okay? Because
Yeah.
they rejoice in that. You know, people say, "You ever get tired of babies like just cooing or crying or doing whatever?" You know, I have like pacifiers or kid toys rolling out, every week, and I say, you know what? That's life. That's
Yeah.
life in
Absolutely.
our church.
Yeah.
I will take that every day than people not having kids,
Yeah.
or us being a church just of people that are kids were in the past,
Mhm.
And so I love seeing new life, and you guys are a wonderful example. When you share with me just some of the feedback after the message, I'm like, we got to interview you.
Yeah.
Now, this is the question I want to ask you. This is fun. All right. How has life changed since you've become parents?
Oh man. Well, besides the obvious of little less
What's the
sleep,
obvious? No
little
sleep.
less
Yeah, there we
sleep.
go.
Although
Yeah.
it's been crazy, he's been a really good sleeper,
Yeah.
and we're thankful for that. But man, it's just, I can only speak for myself as a dad. It is one of the most rewarding things ever, and it really does make me emotional. I mean, times where I just am staring at him, and I'm like, one thing that has changed for me is I feel like my relationship with God has grown because of Hudson. And so when I'm looking at him and I see how much I deeply, deeply love him, it reminds me that it is comparable to none to how God loves us. And my relationship with God has strengthened way more because I have felt myself loving him so much. And at times, as a sinner, I have put him or Abby or other things above my relationship with God. And obviously that's not what it needs to be. But I find myself at a loss for words at times where I'm just thankful, truly blessed to be a dad, a leader of a household, and I put myself to a high standard in that, and I'm glad we're in a church that believes that exact same thing. Lead Men's Ministry is a great way for us to grow as fathers, and so I'm very thankful for that as well.
Let's just say he said lead. Bing, right?
Yeah. So it's been an amazing 5 months, and I'm so excited to continue to see what God has in store for us. So
Yeah.
I would say for me, just selflessness. Just being a mother, you have someone who is 100% reliant on you. And trying to break those patterns of family patterns, being very aware of that. And when you're on zero sleep, when you're exhausted, and they're trying to communicate to you, it brings up those bad tendencies.
Yeah.
So he really has taught me to be selfless for him, in the sense of just being a good mom to him. I have to put my needs. Obviously, I need to eat. I need to drink water. Like
you have to create a great environment for him too.
Right.
So.
But also like things that were important are not as important anymore. just because I'm like, I have a healthy baby that I've prayed for so long about. Like, it was really hard. It's really hard to wrap my mind around that that's my kid after so many years of being told that it's not going to happen. Like,
You carry this burden around for
yeah,
so
it's
many
hard
years,
to
and
lay it down when it's not. And people are like, well, it's not real anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but I grieved for 10 years. Like, I don't know how to not. And then my heart breaks for the women who are still going through it or to go through it, because I know how dark of an area that is. So if you are listening and going through infertility, like, just know, like, it's really hard. You're not alone. Like, really,
And that's such a cliche thing to say, but it's true.
But
it's
those
really
are the words
true.
I sought for.
Yeah.
When I was
Abby's genuine about that.
yeah,
for sure.
when I was going through it, those are the words I wanted to hear. Like, it's going to be okay. Be an advocate for yourself. Be an advocate for your kids, because they need you.
Yeah.
And just really lean into the Lord, which does sound cliche again, but it's so true, because for so long I wanted control over it. And
well, you mentioned it as a burden, and it reminds me of Scripture. It says, "Cast your anxieties on Him, because He cares for you." And that word anxiety can also be burdens,
right?
And
well, I was anxious too.
It's yeah. And burdens makes us anxious, but like literally casting is throwing it, because the Lord can carry it.
Yeah, because for so long I wanted control, and I was like, it's not going to happen for me. And sometimes, like, people are like, oh, like, what would you have done differently? And I would, like, it's so hard to say, but like, it's so true. Like, I wish I just really relied more heavily on Him, because for so long I was so bitter. I was so mad.
Like, why God?
Yeah, and I brought it to Him because He asks us to bring that to Him. Like, when you hide it, that's when it can get dangerous, right? But like, I brought it to Him, and I was bitter. I was mad. Pregnancy announcements were hard for me. Like, family functions were hard for me. Holidays were hard for me, because all you can think about when you have this deep longing is, when am I going to have a kid to do these things with? And so I just wish I did not have such a bitter heart towards it, and really had more joy in those times leading up to Hudson, but you can't go back. But that's what He's taught me too, is like, other circumstances that have happened, like, I try to not take so seriously or so harshly, or so, because like with bitterness, because I don't know what God's going to do with it. For 10 years, I sat on it for 10 years for a reason, right? It really grew my faith. It really grew me to really look at who I am as a person.
And that whole time He was working.
I wouldn't take it back. If I could go back, honestly, people are like, oh, would you change it? Honestly, no, because I wouldn't be the Christian I am. I wouldn't be who I was. And because, I'm
waiting, the pain,
right.
All
it was
that
all
is never in vain.
Right. And
Never
during
is.
it, I was
Working,
like, people would tell me that. I'm like, oh, be quiet.
I
Like,
know,
stop
right.
telling me that. Like, I'm like sobbing in the corner. But really, it truly is. It truly is such, I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't.
The Lord, He heard your cry, and He had it all sorted, even down to Robbie.
Yeah, which is wild.
With you, yes, and it's just a testament to anybody who's listening or watching, no matter what they're waiting for, but specifically even for this, could be infertility. The Lord knows your heart. He hears your cries. He understands your situation, and we would be wrong to say, hey, name it or claim it, say this certain prayer and do these certain things, and all will happen the way that you want to happen. Sometimes we don't know why there's a wait. Sometimes we don't know why there are certain situations, or why you even had to be placed in the situation to begin with. But the thing is, the Lord knows. He's walking with you, even when we can't put nuance, or we can't put answers to your questions. The Lord knows, and it sounds so cliche.
Yeah.
But when it clicks, you realize you can rest in it.
Yeah.
Right.
And this, I really wouldn't trade any of this for anything. I mean, we talked about individually things that have shaped us as a mom and a dad, but us together as parents, man, I've been so proud to be a part of this marriage, to be the husband in this marriage, because I have seen so much growth in such a short amount of time. Now, we've been together for 6 years, but
6.
married for 2.5.
2.
And we have grown so much. We've seen so many things and grown so much as parents. And the book that you guys give us at Child Dedication, which we already had and we're reading, which we're very thankful for.
That's just bonus points.
Yeah,
You already read the book before we give it to you. Yeah.
I was like,
Um,
oh, look at this book, Rob.
yeah.
Now we have 2 copies.
But it talks a lot about being advocates and for our children. We are God's advocates for them, and we're called obviously to populate the earth and further His kingdom, but we're also called to further the gospel generation to generation. I'm studying a little bit of the Old Testament right now and sitting in Deuteronomy. Moses is giving his opening message before they head into the promised land with Joshua, and before he passes away, and is talking about the importance of passing the word and the gospel down to generation to generation. Don't add and subtract from the gospel.
That's right.
And make sure that you're passing that down and that it's staying true. And then they go into all the covenants and laws and stuff back to Leviticus and everything. And it's just a beautiful thing. I was actually reading that today, and I'm like, man, what a perfect time. As I sat there, I get to spend Mondays with Hudson, and sat there and just watched him and like prayed, God, let me just continue to be an advocate for him. Let Abby and I continue in our marriage as parents, continue to show him Christ. We cannot make him or force him. It will be his decision one day, but we can be great examples. And I'm thankful we're in a church that provides that with great community as well. I've met so many great people here so far in the short amount of time that we've been here. And yeah, it's just been a great time for sure.
Yeah. Going through IVF too, you really have to rely on each other. It was one of the it is the hardest thing that I've personally done.
A lot of pregnancy is waiting and sitting maybe in anxious feelings like, man, the like miscarriage is a real thing. But in IVF, there's little processes all the time where you can sit in fear and anxiety, or you can sit in prayer and trust. And not saying that we were perfect all the way, but we always kind of found our way back to God and saying, look, we're not going to do this by ourselves. We can't do this by ourselves.
It will grow your marriage. Just let it grow your marriage in a godly way.
And another thing that we prayed for this opportunity from the start. Once we found out all the ins and outs, and we were like sitting there like, wow, what the heck? Like, this is a lot. Like, we were like praying about being just
helping people
understand
with questions.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like I said, I search for podcasts like this to be like, help me understand this. So yeah, this is an answered prayer to itself when you asked us to be on this podcast. Yeah. It was just such a blessing to be able to talk about it.
If you're from around here
or
in this
not.
area and stuff, West Alice, Aurora, that's where the infertility clinic is. That's where we're at and getting everything going and stuff. So
and you can pick their brains here at Kenosha City
Church
let
too.
Us know. They'll save a seat for
it.
you. Yeah. Well, Robbie, Abby, thank you so much just for sharing today. I believe that the people are going to be informed. They're going to understand that this is a complex issue. But what's not complex is that the Lord is the author of life. We want to honor Him in this, and I thank you so much. Through the pains, the twists, the turns, and every turn, you wanted to honor the Lord in this. And today we get to rejoice with new life with Hudson. And it's good to interview you today too. You interrupt a little bit, but it's allowed.
He's like, I have stuff to say too, guys.
Well, again, if you have any questions from this podcast today, questions for Robbie or Abby or myself or the pastors here at Kenosha City Church, we would love to get in touch with you. In fact, you can get a hold of us at info@kenosha.church, or if you just want to email me directly, Andy@kenosha.church, we would love to answer whatever question that you may have. Also, just to let you know, we're going to have an extended edition of this exclusively on our Spotify channel. Just look up Kenosha City Church on Spotify, where we hear the extended interview also from our ministry partners. And we hope that you can subscribe to that as well there too. All right.
Awesome.
Well, last word.
Okay. Last word is, again, if you're struggling, we love you. God loves you. He hears you. Just keep going. I know it's hard, but just keep going, keep pushing through, and keep loving the Lord through it. And we're here for you. Please reach out. Like, from the bottom of my heart, I don't know you, but I would love to talk to you, and I would love to walk alongside you in that. And one day you will reach it, whatever that might be. The Lord will show you your path. Just be patient, be diligent, advocate for yourself, advocate for your children.
And don't forget, the things that you already have. Your marriage is super important. Work with one another.
It's not pretty. It's not
Yeah.
easy. Like,
Pray with
yeah.
one another. Just have those deep conversations, those important conversations.
Be honest.
It's not going to be easy, but it's well worth it.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful to sit here today, knowing that we didn't do every single thing right, and knowing that we probably will not always do every single thing right as human sinners. But we are always in our household going to point ourselves back to God and allow Him to take control of those things. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robbie and Abby, thank you so much for being a faithful example to the Lord and to this church community here at Kenosha City Church. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for your time.